Did you hear the story about the kid who was outside the Democratic fundraiser selling kittens? When the people came out from the fundraiser, he was holding up the kittens and he was saying, "Buy a Democrat kitten." Well, a couple of weeks later, the Republicans held a fundraiser in the same place. And when they came out, there was the same kid with the kittens. And he said, "Buy a Republican kitten." And one of the members of the press who'd seen him there 2 weeks before said, "Wait a minute, kid. You were selling these kittens the last time as Democrat kittens. How come the Republican kittens now?" Kid says, "Because now they got their eyes open."
Good morning. You just have to love some lighthearted humor from Ronald Reagan early this morning, right? What a wonderful president he was. And we're lucky to have another wonderful president right now, of course, Mr. Donald J. Trump. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Hopefully, you guys are having a great morning. It's cold where I'm at, but it's going to warm up a little bit today. I can't remember. I think I read it's going to get up to a whole 72 degrees, something along those lines. Good morning, Dottie. Good morning, Rob. Good morning, Karen. And as usual, another busy Wednesday morning. Good morning, Linda. And yes, I love Reagan also. And he was a funny guy, no question about it. I've got so many different clips of him telling different jokes, but he said some very real things, of course, during his term also, as has of course, Donald Trump. We're going to be talking about some of his statements today and how he's reshaped the future of Cracker Barrel, which I think is pretty darn funny. Lots going on. I just want to make sure everyone knows I am not going to be having a show tomorrow. I always say I'm going to do a replay, but I always wake up in the morning and totally forget. And then I've got to figure out how to do the replays. I did it once and I've got to do it again. And let's see, Linda says up to 80 near St. Louis. That's really nice. No rain in sight, unfortunately. Karen, it's cold in Pittsburgh. Yeah, and I love Pittsburgh too. It is always a little bit cooler on the East Coast. Good morning, Tammy Jerry Hoover. Rob drove to work with the doors off and the top down on the Jeep. I am very jealous, Rob. My Jeep is having some type of hydro lock, I think they call it. So I have not been able to enjoy much of this summer with the doors off and the top down, unfortunately. But that's okay. I'm working on getting that fixed. But unfortunately, tomorrow duty calls. You know, I work in the security world, anti-piracy, film security, and we don't know from day to day what's happening. You know, we get work orders, and obviously, you know, the show, as much as I actually stress over missing shows, I really do. And I don't know why, because it's not like you guys can't get your news or talk about these issues somewhere else, but it's become such a part of my daily life that it's so weird. And I feel, so disappointed when I can't do a show. But at the same time, like I said before, I don't have sponsors. I don't look for sponsors, just kind of a hobby show and a good way for us all to get together and chat about some important issues. But duty calls and work, unfortunately, has to come first. And being self-employed, owning a security company, it's very important that I do that work when it's called upon me, because gosh knows there's a lot of competitors out there in any field imaginable. But either way, I will not have a show tomorrow. I'm going to be working in the morning. I'll be out in St. Louis, Missouri, of course, and then I've got a work order for tomorrow after that in Springfield, Missouri. So if it's in this business, when you have to travel, you have to send in a travel request to the film studios to approve travel. And I haven't gotten my travel request approved yet, but I think it will be. And if it is approved and I have to drive to Springfield, Missouri, then I will not have a show Friday morning either, because of course I'll be gone. So I will keep everybody updated whether or not, because on Friday I want to talk about some interesting things. I've got some new footage on that UFO encounter that took place in Las Vegas that I really want to share with you guys. And I was planning on doing that on Friday. So we'll see how it all plays out. I will keep everyone informed. And Linda says, we can replay ourselves. I did yesterday's show last night. Thank you for that, Linda. I appreciate it. Good morning, Sherry. Good morning, Brenda. And Yeah, I hate missing shows. I really do. And I always feel like there's so much to talk about, even though maybe it's just me that feels that way. There's so much to talk about. And, one of the things I want to talk about today, we're going to talk about Cracker Barrel going back to their old logo. And did Donald Trump play a role in that? I think he may have. And then, of course, we're going to talk about crime. We're going to talk about a new task force that Donald Trump wants to put together to fight not just violence, but protests and other things going on in the country. Of course, people losing their mind over what's going on in Washington, D.C. with the National Guard, particularly now that the National Guard is armed. And we're going to see a lot more of that, into the future. A lot more. Vernon says, our coffee won't be the same without you. Ah, thank you, Vernon. I appreciate that. Neither will mine. I drink iced coffee, but I do have some iced coffee here. So I'm drinking coffee with you, whether you know it or not. When we're playing videos, I'm drinking my iced coffee. But by the way, I used to drink pods. I think I may have talked about this before. Have you ever heard of a company called Christopher Bean? So I buy now this liquid coffee from Christopher Bean. It comes in all these different flavors. I have like an entire shelf in my refrigerator full of all these different little vials of Christopher Bean coffee flavors. And it's for me a healthier alternative because I put some ice in a cup. I pour some almond milk in my cup. I put a little bit of the Christopher Bean. Today I've got chocolate. I think it's dark chocolate peppermint is the flavor I have today. It's sugar free, 0 calories, and it's organic. And you just pour a teaspoon or two in your cup and with your almond milk, and it's just as healthy as can be. Aw, thank you, Sherry. I appreciate that. Well, yesterday, there's a lot that went on yesterday, a lot of different people talking about different things. Rob, oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I hate it that when I have to miss a show, I really do. But I'm working on some guest hosts. I know I've talked to Colonel Joe Adams about coming on and hosting, and Colonel Adams is going to join us again. He is going to join us again, and he probably would have joined us this past Monday, but I wasn't able to get a hold of him. I had a family member in the ER on Sunday late into the night, so I wasn't, and I was out of town prior to that. This coming Monday, of course, is going to be Labor Day, and I will not have a show on Labor Day. And so he, I'm seeing if he can join us another day next week, but if not, it'll be the Monday after that. He's going to be joining us on Monday mornings, which is wonderful because there's so much that goes on over the weekend. Then we can talk to him on Monday morning. I miss him. I miss Colonel Joe Adams of the Washington Guard and his advice, and he shares so much inside information with us, and his viewpoint is certainly missed on the show. So we'll be glad to talk to him. And but in the meantime, so much going on. Donald Trump, he's supposed to sign an executive order ending cashless bail for criminals in Washington D.C. Now, this is not going to go over very well, with a lot of folks, Democrats in this country. And I don't think I have to tell you how crazy it is, how absolutely crazy it is that Democrats think crime is okay. And I'm sorry, if you're a Democrat and you're listening, you're probably thinking, well, that's not how I feel. Crime's not okay. Well, then talk to your leaders. Talk to your leaders because that's how they feel. I always say, I don't blame the Democrats, the people we know, even though, yes, voting Democrat basically gives the power to these Democrat leaders. It absolutely does. But I do think a lot of Democrats we know, a lot of people who are even just non Trump supporters, but kind of lean conservative or Republican, I don't think they understand that either not voting for Donald Trump or not voting Republican or not voting at all gives more power to these voices who want to see crime in your city, and they obviously do. We're going to hear some words from Brandon Johnson. We're going to hear some words shortly from other activists who just simply don't get it. Do you know, I just read a poll earlier this morning. It said 81% of those polled believe that crime is a real problem in some of our larger cities. And of course it is. How could you say it's not? What did Chicago have? I think I read like 649, something along that, homicides last year. Is that right? I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because every weekend we're hearing, oh, 4 killed in Chicago, 5 killed in Chicago over the weekend. It's insane. But yet we have these people saying that, crime isn't what the problem is. And I understand there's a lot of systemic issues that lead to crime, and certainly systemic issues that lead to more crimes being committed by a certain percentage of people in the country. And of course, if you listen to Brandon Johnson or some of these other activists, they consider the punishment of criminals to be racist. Now, to me, when you have 81% of people polled saying, yes, there's a problem in our big cities, when you look at the homicide rates in places like Chicago or what was DC for the first time in a long time in Washington, DC, they went, what, 9 days without a homicide. You would think that that people in these big cities would be, let's just say St. Louis as an example, because I'm a little bit more familiar with the rate of homicide in St. Louis. Now, in the city of St. Louis, I've reported often on, the number of homicides that occur each year. And it's usually pretty standard, but I'll tell you what, the majority of those people being killed are Black Americans. That's the vast majority. Probably makes up about 98% of all homicides in the city of St. Louis. Same thing for the city of Chicago, same thing for the city of New York, same thing for Los Angeles, same thing for Washington, D.C. And then, yes, unfortunately, it is also a larger proportion of Black Americans that are committing the crimes. You can go in any of these cities and you can look at the statistics, and, that's not a racist thing to say. It's a fact. And I care. I don't know about you guys, but I care. I had an old show where anytime there was a homicide in the city of St. Louis, I talked about that person. Their lives matter just as much as anyone else. They were all innocent children at one time that somehow ended up committed a criminal act, sometimes just one criminal act, sometimes caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. I talked to a lot of these different mothers of victims of crime, and some of them would say, yes, my child was involved, in some drug dealing and other criminal activity. Some of them said, absolutely not. They would never do that. They just hung out with the wrong people. But the fact is that these activists and people like Brandon Johnson, people like Kim Gardner, or, Kimmy in St. Louis, you would think that they would wake up and say, you know what? Who is getting harmed the most by the criminal activity in our city? Who do we need to protect the most? But that's not what they're doing. And yeah, it is very much systemic. I understand that. There are a lot of these kids. If you would have listened to me back in 2012, 13, 14, I talked about this stuff all the time, with crime in the city of St. Louis. Good morning, Phyllis. And because what a lot of people don't understand, and a lot of people are too busy to even care or get into the intricate nature of what's actually going on, is that a lot of children really have no choice. This is true. There are times when children have no choice, at some point they become adults, and then they should understand right from wrong. But some of these younger kids you're hearing committing crimes, they come from a family who, cycle after cycle, are committing crimes, or in living this cycles of prison. They have parents in prison, or parents that are drug addicts. They have no adult. You guys are all very familiar with how this works. I don't have to tell you how it works, but I will tell you that there were plenty of cases I saw in which mothers and fathers, mostly mothers, because a lot of times the fathers aren't in the picture, were encouraging these kids to go out and commit crimes. I kid you not, I can't tell you how many stories I reported on back then where it was a situation where the mother, in often cases, it was the mother who would tell the kids, hey, you need to go out and earn some money. These kids are 12 years old. You need to go out and bring some money back to support your family. And of course, a 12-year-old, they don't have any way to go out and get a job. And the mother will introduce them to people, and they'll end up going out and selling drugs on the street, or robbing people, or carjacking people. And the mother doesn't care. They just care about the money coming into her, coming in to support the other kids, because she doesn't want to work. And I'm sorry if that sounds terrible and if it sounds racist. And I'm not saying that that's the norm or that's the majority of these cases. But in some extenuating circumstances, it certainly is the case. And then you look at, people want to talk about, well, the jobs and, everything else. I'm not going to preach to you guys about all these things that you already know. But either way, arresting criminals when people commit a criminal act, by the children maybe is a little bit different story. People know right from wrong. And I don't care what you tell me, these people getting picked up off the street with weapons, carjackings, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds committing carjacking, they know that's not right. They know it's not right. And at some point, we absolutely have to make people take accountability for their actions. And if you go, of course, outside of the bigger cities and you go to a smaller town, let's just say as an example, Ironton, Missouri, because my family had a cabin there. I would say 99 to 100% of the crimes out there are committed by white people because that's who lives in that area. It's just not a big city, so it's not getting all the attention of, a St. Louis or a Chicago. So crimes are being committed all across our country by people of all races. It's not certainly not just Black people. It absolutely is not. That might be the case in an urban area, but it's not the case around the country. That's why it's not racist. It's absolutely not racist. Jay says Black deaths only matter if a cop or a white person is involved. And well, that's because we've got lawsuits, which is a whole other, system that's taking place. Good morning, Glesna from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But either way, you know what? We see, we don't have to have people tell us, we see that there's a problem, not just in the big cities, but all across this country with crime. And it's not just Black Americans we're going after, it's all people who commit crimes. The city that I live in now, we don't have a lot of crime here, but the crime that is committed, I would say again, 99% of it's committed by white people. And I think that speaks for a lot of America. So we're not specifically going after Black Americans. But I will tell you, these people like Brandon Johnson, they need to wake up and say, hey, our young men aren't surviving to be 35 years of age. We need to do something about it. And as much as I would love to say mentoring and youth groups is the answer, it is in the long run, but in the short time, we have to take the criminals off the street. We have to find better ways to make sure that we don't continue creating this criminal element. But of course, Democrats, what do? They cater to the criminals. They give them more rights than you have. And the criminals have the right not to be searched. We don't have stop and frisk laws any longer because that violates their rights. But you don't have the right to walk around your city and feel safe. And again, I know I'm just preaching to the choir here, but it is absolutely not racist to arrest violent criminals. If you commit a violent act, guess what? You need to be behind bars. I'm going to show you the statement here from Brendan Johnson, of course, Pritzker standing right behind him. No surprise there. And then we're going to hear from an activist on this same matter who, again, is saying it is racist to arrest criminals. Now, are they saying it's racist to arrest criminals, let's say in Ironton, Missouri, where all the criminals that are going to be arrested are going to be white criminals? Or are they just worried about the city of Chicago, where the majority of the arrests and the people that are going to get picked up are going to be Black Americans? So let's take a look.
The federal government should spend that money on proven solutions to crime and violence reduction. We cannot incarcerate our way out of violence. We've already tried that, and we've ended up with the largest prison population in the world without solving the problems of crime and violence. The addiction on jails and incarceration in this country, we have moved past that. It is racist, it is immoral, it is unholy, and it is not the way to drive violence down. We cannot return to the same failed strategies that got us here in the first place. Under the previous presidential administration, we requested more federal resources to address gun violence in our city. We continue to make that same call. We have made significant progress on our own, but there is so much more that we can do if we had real support from the federal government. Our communities need more federal resources for public safety. There's no question about that. But unsolicited, unwarranted military takeover is not needed.
Okay, well, he's wrong. We all know he's wrong. And this is why the city of Chicago, of course, is in the capacity that it is. Same as the city of St. Louis, same as New York City and so many other places. I actually feel a lot safer on the streets, quite honestly, of New York City than I do St. Louis or parts of Chicago. But I'll tell you what, he's absolutely 100% wrong. What they were trying to do in the city of Chicago, if you recall, was reparations. They really thought if they could get money and give money to the people in these impoverished communities, that they would commit less crime. Well, that program did not work. It absolutely did not work. If you give people money, well, guess what? They still want more money. They're still going to go the easy route. And if robbing someone, carjacking someone, is going to be the easy route, then of course that's what they're going to do. And of course, in Chicago, a lot of it's smash and grab crimes, looting, and that type of thing. It's pretty common in Chicago, and it's pretty darn sad. And don't you think the people of Chicago deserve to have a safer life? That the kids deserve to be able to play out in their front yard without having to worry about bullets flying by, that older people can sit out on their front porches and not have to worry about a drive-by shooting. I mean, if you talk to people who live in some of these communities, they have no idea what it's like to have peace, to not have to worry about people breaking into your house at night, to not have to worry about getting shot at or becoming a victim of a crossfire. It's really sad to think that here in America, these are issues that we have to deal with. We've talked about this before. There are so many people who will say that the crime in some of our inner cities is worse than what you would experience in Afghanistan or Iraq or some of these other countries where we think of them as being very violent. But here, actually, in the United States, we have a lot more violence here than some of those countries do. And Jay says, coming from a mayor with 18% approval rating, I'm not surprised. Exactly that, Jay. Kimberly says the word unholy coming from a Democrat's mouth. And Jay says that might be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Good morning, Elizabeth. Dottie says, please send the money. Of course, they want the money because they think that taking federal money, dividing it up, and giving, they did that in St. Louis too, by the way, where they had families apply and each family could get, couple $100 extra a month. I think it was up to $500 a month for people, impoverished in the city of St. Louis, but it does not stop crime. It does not deter crime. When people realize that it's an easy life of crime to go out and, of course, here's the problem. We all know how crime works. It's easier for some people to go out and rob people and carjack people than it is to go get a job and work legitimately. Clearly, you're not going to earn as much money if you go and get a legitimate job because they're going to be taxing the heck out of you. We all learned that lesson, haven't we? I get it, but I don't want to spend my life behind bars. I don't want to be dead by the age of 35. And of course, there are bigger things we need to worry about. We need to teach these kids as they're growing up from a very young age that your life does mean something, and that living past the age of 30, 35, many of them don't even make it past 25. Actually, your life is important. It is valuable. But we're not teaching that to some of these kids. They don't think their life is valuable. They don't know anything different, and I always think about it with these parents. I'm like, why don't you just move? A lot of these kids end up in this life of crime because of where they live. And I've heard countless parents say, that parents I've talked to, well, I've lived here my whole life. I shouldn't have to move, or I can't afford to live somewhere else. Okay, so stay where you are and your children will end up being killed. Some families losing literally all of their children, more than one child, to a life of violence. And then we have Brandon Johnson standing there saying that arresting criminals, taking criminals off the street, imprisoning criminals is not the answer. You know what? I'm tired of waiting on the answer for the criminals. I really am. Yes, I do have a sensitive spot in my heart for these people who feel that they have no other choice. This is what their life is about. But guess what? I care a lot more about the rest of us who've chosen not to live a life of crime, that we should be able to be safe. We should be able to go to sleep at night, not worry about somebody breaking in our doors, or worried about getting carjacked at a stoplight. And it's absolutely ridiculous. Jay says 239 days, and Chirac has had 262 murders. I know, it's so sad, isn't it, Jay? It's just absolutely unbelievable. Talking, of course, about Chicago, I think they said 630 something homicides in 1 year. Just unbelievable. So I'm going to play a video for you. This is an activist, and he's going back to the same motto that what Donald Trump is doing is racist, that we cannot allow. And here's what's different about his tone. I feel that Brandon Johnson, and I feel that this activist, these people are just giving the criminals, they're empowering them even more. They're kind of telling them, okay, We're not going to stand down. If the National Guard comes into our city, if Donald Trump and Republicans try to arrest the violent criminals in our city, we're going to fight back. And this is really kind of scary to me, the rhetoric that I'm hearing being used. So let's take a listen to this.
We believe that the National Guard and the military occupation is the first step into rounding black people up and putting them in detainment camps here in Washington, D.C. and around the United States of America. We believe that.
I'm sure he does believe that. He's wrong. He is very, very wrong. This is not a racist issue. It's not a black-white issue. It is absolutely not. Because while we may be starting in the cities with the highest crime rates, criminals are going to run. They're going to scatter to all different areas. And then at some point, we're going to have to chase those criminals into the smaller areas. And we're going to be fighting crime all across the country. We might be starting at a city that has 630 something homicides per year. But trust me, we're going to be tackling all areas of the United States at some point and taking violent criminals off the street. What I don't understand is why these people aren't speaking out saying, hey, if you commit a crime, if you harm another American, another community member, you're going to go to jail. How about we stop catering and coddling the criminals for once? But that's just not the Democrat way, is it? It's always about martyring the criminals, the people who want to arrest the criminals, always the bad people, right? And so Donald Trump is thinking about creating this rapid response team of National Guardsmen. And I think this is a really good idea. And I think that you'll probably agree with that. So, under this rapid response team, what would happen is, let's say if there is unrest in an area, let's say they come into St. Louis and they arrest Tashara Jones and Cori Bush and a few other folks because of what happened with the Rams, $280 million just disappearing. So let's say that happened. Well, that would probably cause a lot of unrest around the city of St. Louis because, of course, there would be certain people who would speak out and say, oh, this is just racist. This isn't about the money. This is about something else, blah, 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 blah. And then we have the civil unrest taking place in the city of St. Louis. Well, then Donald Trump dispatches this rapid response team, a national rapid response team, and it's National Guard. The National Guard rolls into St. Louis. They are deputized, so they're not defenseless like they've been in the past. They carry real guns with real bullets, and they actually tackle violence. Well, guess what's going to happen? We're going to have a lot less uprising, a lot less violence that's going to take place in our country, a lot less vandalism to take place in our country. Good morning, Brenda. Brenda says, I love what is happening in DC, but it's a dangerous precedent to send the feds to each city. Maybe rapid response is okay. Good morning, Bill. And Brenda, it is a slippery slope, and I see where you're coming from. Of course, a lot of people on all sides of the fence feel that it's a very slippery slope. Some people consider it a police state, that if we give too much leeway, I'm not sure what word I'm looking for, but if we allow the federal government to start policing our cities, whether it's a big city or a small city, then we're weaponizing the government and we're going to become a police state. And for me personally, I welcome it. And I know that's easy to say right now because Donald Trump is the president. And of course, under a Biden, under an Obama, under Newsom, or whoever the next Democrat candidate may be, a police state may not be such a good thing when they're coming and knocking on your door. And instead of arresting people for carjacking, they're arresting you for what you say on social media or for having a podcast or for any host of other things. It's happening in the UK. It can definitely happen here also. And so I understand the slippery slope for sure. It's great to have that police state when they're arresting criminals and going after the right people to make our city streets safer under, of course, a Republican president or, a conservative president. But it's a whole other thing to have a police state. And we were almost kind of there under the Biden administration, quite honestly, because look at J6. I could give you a number of examples where people were arrested who were not committing violent acts just because of their political affiliations or because of the words they said on social media, different things like that. So I get it. We've got to be very, very careful with that slippery slope. No question about it. But in the meantime, I feel like it's an emergency that we get into these cities and we create a safer environment for everyone. I think what's happening in Washington, D.C. is absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to see it all play out in the city of Chicago. And let's reevaluate after that happens. We know that Donald Trump is going to make sure that we have various multi-agency task force, National Guard in the city of Chicago. Let's just use that as an experiment. We'll see how it works. If in fact it doesn't help, if it makes the problem worse, if it isn't what we imagined it to be, then of course everybody can kind of say, okay, we've seen it in action, not working. And if it's going to be very different tackling crime in Chicago versus tackling crime in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a very small place, as you know. It's a very small place. They were able to very quickly move out their homeless encampments, very quickly, secure the city and sweep the streets and prevent crime. Chicago's a whole other ball game. It's a very big spread out area. While most of the crime happens in certain spots, like anywhere else, it's going to be much harder contained. It's going to need a lot more different types of law enforcement groups there. It's going to need a lot more time, to see the effects that it takes place. And in the end, we might say, hey, it's not what we want to do. It's not working out. It's making things worse. And it probably will make things worse at first because the criminals will spread out into other areas. But I like the idea of this National Guard rapid response team that Donald Trump is going to send out into different cities to respond exactly that rapidly. We saw it happening in Los Angeles, of course, when they were having the skirmishes around the city, of course, and we're going to see it. It's going to happen elsewhere too. Don't worry about that. It's not a thing yet, but I think it's a really, really good idea. But no, it is absolutely not racist to take criminals off the street. We all know right from wrong. I am tired of feeling sorry for the criminals. I feel more sorry for the rest of us who have to live our lives in fear. And I think that's how most Americans feel these days. If you're out there, you're living a life of crime, well, guess what? You belong in prison. Maybe not for your lifetime, maybe until you learn better ways and somehow are able to be released into some type of job or school program. We need permanent solutions, no question about it. But the short-term answer, get the criminals off the street, let the rest of us live in peace. Please. I don't think that's too much to ask for, quite honestly. I don't think it's too much to ask for. So I think you guys all saw where Cracker Barrel reversed its decision, right? And decided to go back to the old sign. I was driving home. I had to work late last night. I didn't get home till after midnight. And I was driving home. It's quiet and dark. And I'm thinking, of course, my brain thinking about Cracker Barrel. So many other things I could be thinking about, and I'm thinking about Cracker Barrel. And I kept thinking to myself, like, was this all just a big PR stunt? Were they never intending to change the sign? Are they going to be like an episode of Punked where they say, oh, their CEO, she's really a diehard Christian conservative, and this is just a big PR publicity stunt trying to get some attention? I don't think that's the case. I don't. But I thought about that last night. I'm like, that sure would be wild because that's kind of exactly what it's done. Who paid attention to Cracker Barrel before, right? As a matter of fact, a friend of mine said she went to Cracker Barrel yesterday in some town not too far from me. And I thought, I didn't even know they had a Cracker Barrel there. I had no idea. I don't ever go to Cracker Barrel. And even with the old sign, I have the philosophy where if I can cook it at home, then I'm not going to go to a restaurant and get it. I don't think there's anything on the menu at Cracker Barrel that I can't cook at home better to my taste. So I just don't go. Now, there's a lot of restaurants out there who cook things that I cannot make at home, and that's where, of course, you'll find me. Country cooking, I got that down pat. But I've paid more attention to Cracker Barrel over the past couple weeks than I ever have before, ever in my existence. And so I saw this message by Donald Trump, and I didn't see this until late last night. And I'm like, okay, now I get it. And I think that the folks over at Cracker Barrel are kind of like looking at Bud Light. I think this is a true statement. I didn't go back to confirm it, but I read in a from a news source that said that AB InBev beverages, of course, that took over Budweiser and Bud Light, that they said in the past year that they I think they said that they had to destroy more Bud Light than they sold, that they made X number of Bud Light bottles, cans, etc., Bud Light product, and they ended up having to destroy more than what was actually sold. So, according to that, Bud Light is probably going to go away because it's never recovered from what happened to the Bud Light brand because, of course, their wokeism, as Elon Musk would call it, the woke mind virus. And so I read this, I saw this statement by Donald Trump, and I thought, okay, Cracker Barrel is taking some very good advice here from our president. And this is exactly what Donald Trump stated on True Social. He said Cracker Barrel should go back to the old logo, admit a mistake based on customer response. He said the ultimate poll, and manage the company better than ever before. They got $1 billion worth of free publicity if they play their cards right. Very tricky to do, but a great opportunity. Have a major news conference today. Make Cracker Barrel a winner again. Remember, in just a short period of time, I made the United States of America the hottest country anywhere in the world. 1 year ago, it was dead. Good luck. Well, Cracker Barrel did exactly that. Now, I'm not saying they did it because of what Donald Trump said, but maybe they did. But he is absolutely 100% correct. You just got all this free publicity. Let's just go back to business as usual. But I'll tell you what, is it too late? Because there's a lot of people I've talked to who said, you know what, just because they wanted to do that goes to show how they really feel. And I'm not going to support that wokeism by ever going back to Cracker Barrel again. And a lot of people said that they don't want to back a company that would have ever even considered these types of changes. And that even though they're going back to the old logo, they're still continuing to remodel their stores. They're taking away the antiques they had on the walls and that country feeling. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is I really do think that people should support Cracker Barrel because they did exactly what they should have done, what any company should do, is they listen to the people. And the people spoke, and like I've said, and we've all said many times, we are the majority. The conservative folks, the red states, the red cities, we are the majority. And our dollars do make a big difference. I've heard different reports how much money Cracker Barrel lost, anywhere from $200 million in value to $500 million in value. I don't know where that true statement lands, somewhere in between, probably. But I think that they have learned their lesson. I never went to Cracker Barrel to begin with, but I'm certainly not going to boycott them because they once had a idea to become woke. They learned their lesson, as any good company should, that we are the majority. Bud Light had to learn the hard way. Cracker Barrel had to learn the hard way, but at least they're doing the right thing now. Good morning, Robert. Cracker Barrel is dead. Robert says, "I'm not." Are you saying, Robert, they're not coming back from this mistake? I think you're probably right. They're probably not. But I'll tell you what though, I as much as I say that, I've driven past 3 Cracker Barrels this week alone. And every Cracker Barrel I have driven past has been packed. Absolutely packed. The parking lot packed. I don't really know that it's kept people away, quite honestly. And that's like Bud Light. I don't drink Bud Light or beer in general, but I go out and I see people drinking Bud Light again, but there are still some holdouts that say never again, not going to do it, too woke for me. Same with so many of these other stores. Ulta, got hit really hard over wokeism. There's a lot of different companies that have. Donna says they need to clean the place occasionally. Yes. And, I don't, as far as the decor, I've seen the new decor. It looks very plain, is all I've got to say. But when I go to a restaurant, quite honestly, I'm not going for the decor. I just think that with Cracker Barrel, the main reason why people go is the nostalgia because the food is just mediocre. It's really not that good unless you're somebody who doesn't cook it all at home. And that's the only place you can go for fried chicken or, cornbread or pancakes and things. Their food is really not that great. However, you go for the nostalgia. I love the little store outside of Cracker Barrel. There's been times when I've had to buy gifts for somebody, and I just go to the store to buy something for someone, or I'll go in and get a gift certificate for someone and buy something at the store. Kind of reminds me of an old mercantile store, from back in the day. But we'll see. As anything else happens in life, we will see how it all works out. I don't know if you guys heard about this. We've talked a lot about, and I'm going to be flipping around to some different topics here, but we've talked about California, fire aid, the Palisades fire, all of those folks there who've lost their home, lost their land. Did you know a big chunk of that land along the beach in the Malibu area has been sold to a company from China? No big surprise there. I think we all saw it coming. I've been trying to keep an eye out on the land that was in Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, that was largely affected by Helene. I haven't seen any reports yet that any of that land or homes are being bought from other, foreign countries, but I expect it to happen. Now, of course, FEMA said that there's a possibility that they'll never allow that land in those areas to be resold because, of course, the danger of a potential other flood. We're along the Guadalupe River, another area we need to watch out for. We already saw in Hawaii, of course, where the fire ravaged portions of Hawaii, again, being bought up by a lot of different folks in other countries. Well, Greg Abbott of Texas said, nope, not going to happen here. And he has banned the sale of land, homes to foreign countries, as it should. As a matter of fact, he gave a list here. He said, I do have a video. I'm not going to play it. He said, this is very simple. Hostile foreign adversaries like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, as well as terrorist organizations like Tren de Aragua, must not be allowed to own land in Texas, period. Now, what I don't understand is why more people don't like Governor Greg Abbott. I hear so many comments about him where so many people can't stand him, and I don't understand it. Now, I understand why Democrats don't like Governor Greg Abbott. I think he is absolutely fantastic. Quite honestly, I would love to see Greg Abbott be the president of the United States at some point down the road. I would love that. I think he'd do an absolutely fantastic job. And I don't think people give him enough credit because I'm telling you, Texas is doing some great things. Uh-oh, Dottie, did you lose me? I'm still here. Hopefully you guys haven't lost me. Robert says, reminds me of Bed Bath and Beyond in California. Both CB and California are woke. Going and are broke. You got that right. Margie says, is Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, and the Indian Maiden back on their labels? No, but they should be. They absolutely should be. And that's what wokeism does. It takes the brands you love and it changes them. It just kind of reminds me, I always joke around that anytime I like a certain food at a certain place, they get rid of it. I used to love Bread Company, loved it. And now I hate it. I will not go to Bread Company. Some people call it Panera. Rob says I'm still on YouTube. Bill says I'm still on Facebook. Sorry, Dottie, I'm not sure if there was any channel I would disappear from. I wouldn't think it would be X, but I am still here. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Most people are probably tired of hearing from me about now. But Governor Greg Abbott doing some absolutely fantastic things in the state of Texas. I wish that he would do it across the entire country. And a lot of our governors could sure take some advice from Governor Greg Abbott. Robert saw some pictures of Abbott flashing Illuminati symbolism. Not sure if faked or not. Yeah, I don't know. I would have a hard time believing that Governor Abbott has anything to do with any Illuminati. Now, I don't know his background. I've read about him before. I don't remember anything really standing out specifically. I know he's had a tough go of it, with a lot of different things, but I think that he is doing a absolutely fantastic job. And somebody else doing a fantastic job would, of course, be Pete Hegseth. Here's something interesting, and I don't know what you think about this. It's hard. Change is not easy. It's not easy. And so they're thinking about a new name. So, we're all very familiar with the Department of Defense, right? The DoD. Well, now they're talking about changing the name and they're going to call it the Department of War. I'm not sure if I like that or not. Department of Defense will now be the Department of War. And it makes sense because, the Department of Defense, it's not just about defending our country. It is also about actively going to war. But I'm not sure if I like the ring of that. I think I like Department of Defense better. I would be very curious what you guys think about that. Department of Defense or Department of War? A lot of countries do have a Department of War, so it makes sense that it would be called that. And again, it's not just about defense, but sometimes change is hard. So instead of DOD, it'd be DOW. You're going to go have a DOD contract. It's going to be a DOW contract. And and yes, Robert says Department of War was what it was called in our past. Yeah, in a lot of other countries as well. But I kind of like the ring of Department of Defense. So Robert, what are you thinking? Do you like Department of War? Do we go back to where we once were, or do we continue with the Department of Defense? I think Department of War is probably a little more fitting. However, I like the ring of Department of Defense. I don't know how far that's going to go. And Joe says, many, many times in the past, federal task forces have been deployed and many violent criminals have been taken off the streets. One of the biggest issues with St. Louis, Chicago, New York, and LA are the huge police officer shortages. Yes. So, what is the problem with supporting them with the National Guard to get crime cleaned up to better allow the police to keep up? And Joe Lynette, wise words there. We have to solve crime. We have to solve crime. We have to take violent criminals off the street. I don't care if it is the local police department. I don't care if it's the FBI or the US Marshal Service or ICE or the National Guard, or if we're deputizing citizens like they've done in the great state of Texas. We do what we have to do to make our city streets safer. And I don't understand why it's only Democrats who are against making your city streets safer. They want the prisons to be empty. They want criminals to run free. They want to have this system like we're developing now in many areas where you commit a crime, the police come out and they don't even bother arresting people in many of these areas anymore because they just get out, in these no cash bail systems. And so what's the point in arresting people when nothing's going to happen? They're not going to be held. What's even the point in doing it? We've got to change things because I'll tell you what, like I said earlier, our rights are important too. We have the right to feel safe. We have the right to walk our streets and not have to worry about getting robbed, drive down the streets, not have to worry about getting carjacked, live in your home without the fear of a home invasion. We also have rights, and it's about time that our rights become more important than the rights of the criminals. To me, that's one of the bigger battles we face between conservatives, Republicans, and Democrats and liberals is that they want to feel safe too, but their ways of going about it are very different than ours. And they should have learned by now that the most dangerous cities in our country are Democrat led cities. And the reason why is because they don't want to solve crime. They don't want to put the criminals behind bars. They have this plan, I call it the 100-year plan, where they want to bring in, youth groups and mentors and all of these other solutions, money, reparations, and that's going to eventually solve crime. It's going to make people want to stop committing crime, but it doesn't. We see that it doesn't. It's not helping at all. Now there are kids who will come out and tell you. I know people. I've interviewed people who are part of these mentorship programs who do fantastic jobs. There's no question they're saving the lives of some of these youth and keeping them from entering into a life of crime. But it's not going to help everyone. And people know the difference. We have to start holding people accountable who know the difference between right or wrong. I know that I cannot leave my home right now and go to the gas station and rob them and think that I'm going to not go to prison or go to jail for it. Although in some areas right now, a lot of people aren't going to jail for doing exactly that. I'm not going to walk in to Walgreens with my own bag and just take all the makeup and beauty products that I want and walk out without expecting to get arrested. Now, of course, you could also flip that over and say, well, I'm not desperate. I have food in my refrigerator. I have a roof over my head. And while that is also very true, we do need to make sure that people have food. In this country, to me, your basic human right is to have a shelter over your head and food on the table. And that is a big problem. That's not the case for a lot of Americans. There's a lot of Americans out there who do not have food, who do not have shelter, And of course, they're acting out, some of them, in desperation. But that, again, that's not the majority. That's not the majority. The majority of people out committing crime are just violent individuals who have absolutely no value on life, not their life and not your life. And that takes a lot longer to solve that problem. So in the meantime, we've got to make our city streets safer. We've got to. Sherry says, agree with Trump. We don't want to be on the defense. It should be the Department of Offense. Good point. Joe says the federal task forces and the National Guard have always worked directly with local police. It is important to note this is in no way a federal takeover. Absolutely, absolutely, Joe Lynette. I look how many times the National Guard's been called in to different cities to quell, uprisings, protests, different things like that. Now, they've not necessarily been deputized. I think that's the only difference between now and then, is that the National Guard now is potentially carrying weapons with real bullets. People don't like that. I love it personally. Some people don't like it, but I agree absolutely, Joe. And you're probably speaking, maybe to Brenda's comment that it's not a government takeover. We're not weaponizing the police departments. We're not going into a police state. We have an emergency on our hands right now, an emergency. When you have 600 and something people killed in 1 year in the city of Chicago, that's an emergency. If it were, just think about that. If it were 630 something people killed in some other way, guess what? The government would be like, oh my God, we've got to solve this. We've got to figure this out. But nope, because it's violent crime. It's like, oh, let's just sweep it under the rug. And Mr. Parnot, it's all about destabilizing the country. Why they want nonstop violence. Well, absolutely. Donna says Homeland Security. And Robert says, solve crime by fixing the criminal justice system. Yeah, it's not an overnight, absolutely not an overnight solution, is it? It's not an overnight solution. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in this country to solve crime. But in the meantime, this is an emergency. It's a crisis. We have to do something right now and then sort it out later. And that something right now is getting the violent criminals off the streets. And then we'll sort it out later. Once we have the violent criminals off the streets, once we're in a situation like DC, Washington, DC, where they haven't had a homicide in 9 days, probably longer than that now, people feel safer. They're able to go out, walk their dogs, live a normal life like any American should be able to do. And when we start seeing that happen in Chicago and St. Louis and Los Angeles and all of these other high crime areas, then maybe we can take that breather and say, okay, we've gotten the emergency crisis taken care of. We're seeing less crime in all of these areas, maybe no crime or very little crime in some areas. Now we can take that breather and let's go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what do we do about this, this, and this? And trust me, there's a long list of things we need to go back to doing. Well, then we're going to look, okay, and by the way, we don't have any prisons beds. I talked about that yesterday. Where are we going to put all these people? As some people said, tent cities, how quickly they erected the alligator Alcatraz and so on, which of course Democrats are protesting, and a federal judge has announced that it needs to be torn down, which of course is not going to happen. And we will find places to house the criminals. That's a given. We will figure all that out. Now, once we get them there, it's very expensive to house criminals for any period of time. It's extremely expensive. We're talking billions of dollars. And right now, our country is already at a great debt, right? We're already so far down in the hole. And so then we've got to come up with programs about the people who we've picked up off the streets, the violent criminals, and we've got to divide them up. Okay, these are our very serious violent offenders. There's probably very little possibility of rehabilitation for these people. So they go over into box A, then we have the people, well, okay, well, maybe rehabilitation will work. Let's put them over in box B and we'll, sort them out and see if we can rehab these people. Then we're going to go over to box C, which is the people who maybe have committed a crime, couple crimes, nothing too crazy, haven't murdered anyone, possibly a very good opportunity there for rehabilitating these people. They're going to go over there in their box C, and we're going to start dividing people up, figuring out, what to do with these criminals so they're not in that constant prison state. And then I think we're going to go back to the people who are already in prison prior to this, and we're going to start looking at them again too and say, okay, because we can't keep all these people in prison. We've got to start releasing some people. And as much as I hate to do that, keep the most violent criminals in prison. Some of the non-violent criminals, let's give them a break and figure it out. We can't keep all these people in prison. We can't afford it. And let's see. Robert says, fix the country, abide and be governed according to the Bible, ban Sharia and Muslims who will make all of us eventually to submit to their false religion, and other crusades on the way. Jesus is coming soon. The signs are everywhere. Speaking of that, Robert, I showed a video on Facebook the other day. It was a cloud formation that looked like the face of Jesus. Do you know I got reprimanded on Facebook for sharing that video? I'm like, why? My only statement was there are no coincidences. And then I showed the video of the cloud. It wasn't AI or manipulated or anything else. It just looked like the face of Jesus in the clouds. And I got reprimanded for that. I'm like, that is just insane. The world that we live in today, absolutely insane. Donna says Reagan sure made a dent on the war on drugs so long ago. He did, and we've got to do it again. We've got to come up with solutions for the people in our country who are addicted to drugs. I don't know what that solution is. I don't like the idea of holding people involuntarily and getting them off of drugs. Some of these people, though, for their own safety, need to be off the streets. They really do. For their own safety. They're not hurting us. But they are being assaulted. Horrific things are happening to some of these drug addicts that are on the street. They're so out of it, they don't even understand that things are happening to them. And we've got to protect them for their own safety. And people will say, well, that violates their rights. No, we're actually saving their lives. Saving their lives. I am perfectly fine with that. And Robert said it's another sign. Yes, it is. I think we'll be seeing a lot of signs in the near future, won't we? Well, and of course, we'll continue to talk about this discussion. It's not going anywhere. This is going to ramp up as we start heading into Chicago, other areas. We have FBI, of course, coming to the St. Louis area. That's more on a permanent basis, not short term. We're going to see things change in these cities. We're going to see some good and we're going to see some bad. But ultimately, in the end, it's going to be better for all of us. And then we've got to make sure in 2028 that we elect another good conservative leader. Because if we don't, they're just going to go through and they're going to reverse all of these policies. They're going to open up the prisons, let everybody out, even the violent offenders. And we could sit all day and talk about the right way to do things and the wrong way to do things. But we've got to make sure that whatever Trump's actions are, that those are carried out into the future, because we need our city streets to be safer, much safer. And on another note, we'll talk more about that, of course, as time moves on and we learn more and hear more and see more, especially when we start seeing results like we're seeing in Washington, D.C. Hopefully, Democrats will kind of wake up and think, you know what? Yes, I'm Democrat and my leaders are advocating for my streets to be violent again, but it's so nice to have this peace. I think some of these people, you have to remember, they have never known peace in their neighborhoods. It has never happened. And I think once they get a taste of that peace where they can sit out on their front porch and talk to their neighbors and not have to worry about drive-by shootings, it's going to change everything. I really do think that. And Donna says they're taking over our parks where children used to play. Oh, absolutely so. Almost, I hate to say it, but just about any gathering we have these days sometimes turns into violence, whether it's a picnic, a child's birthday party, a memorial service, a football game for kids. It all turns violent. There always ends up being shootings and robberies and just chaos. And it would be so nice, wouldn't it, for kids to be able to go to the park and play and not have to worry about weird perverts or pedophiles or shootings or other crime, being abducted. It's a whole different ball game, and I can't wait to see it play out. And I think that DC so far as a test case is doing absolutely fantastic. I can't wait till it happens in Chicago, St. Louis, and all the other cities around the country. But like anything else, it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. But we will be there. We will absolutely get there. On another note, I wanted to talk very quickly about Walmart. I know I'm about out of time. I thought this was kind of strange. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a fan of Walmart. I refer to them as China Mart because literally everything there is made in China. But this is a story I hadn't heard before. A Walmart executive, they were recently fired. They took over $30,000 a day. Think about that, $30,000 a day in kickbacks for hiring Indian nationals. So what they were doing, it was this executive at Walmart. They were working with recruiters and staffing agencies, and the staffing agencies were paying them money to hire only Indian nationals to work at Walmarts. And this just blew my mind. I would have never thought that something like this could happen at Walmart. And people might say, well, why wouldn't you think it? But I wouldn't have. And so think about that. This executive at Walmart taking in $30,000 a day, every single day, from these various staffing agencies so that they would hire Indian nationals to work at Walmart and not Americans. That's what's even crazier about it. So I don't know how they're going to go back and at Walmart and change this and reverse some of these people that were hired and that these staffing agencies paid to get hired. Now, I don't know. The bigger question is what staffing agencies are going to pay a company to hire Indian nationals unless somebody else is paying the staffing agencies to get the Indian nationals jobs. None of it makes sense to me because that's not typically how recruiting works. Typically, Walmart would be paying the staffing agencies to, for their people to work at the Walmart stores. So I think there's going to be a lot more to this investigation. How are the staffing agencies coming up with this money to pay Walmart? It's a complete reversal of how things normally work. So we'll catch up with that. And Phyllis says, I am sitting on my deck this morning listening to your podcast. And Phyllis, I bet it is absolutely beautiful. Just a reminder that tomorrow, of course, I'm not going to have a show. I'm going to go in. I'm going to see if there's anything else I want to talk about. One other thing we'll jump into before we head out is, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday. Now, Donald Trump, the Trump administration, they're going to cut federal funding from California, other liberal states that allow non-English speaking people to have a CDL to drive trucks around the United States. So they're going to cut federal spending to these states. I don't think California cares. Maybe some of the other liberal states might, but we're doing our best to get these folks off the roadways. Anyway, I'm getting some calls for work and I'm going to have to make a run for it. But as I said earlier, I will not have a show tomorrow because duty calls. I hate missing shows. I absolutely hate it. But duty calls, and I have no choice because work has to come first. And then Friday is kind of questionable. I have received a work order to work in Springfield, Missouri on Thursday, tomorrow, and Friday morning. So if that travel cost is approved, then I'm also not going to have a show on Friday, which I also hate because I really wanted to do a show to talk about some things heading into Labor Day weekend. I can't even believe it is Labor Day weekend, quite honestly. So I'll keep everyone informed. I'm sure you guys have no problem finding your news without me. But I do appreciate all of you joining me today. Thank you so much. I hope you guys all have a really great day. And if I don't have another show between now and then, I hope you have a really great Labor Day weekend. We will have so much to talk about when we come back on Tuesday. But hopefully I'll have a show on Friday and we'll catch up then. We'll talk about some really other great things. I've got a UFO video if we do have a show on Friday to talk about also. But have a good day, everybody. And I will talk to you soon. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap.